I'm Brad Wolf, and welcome to Dire Den. And I don't know if YouTube response videos are still a cool thing to do, but I'm doing it because Bob the World Builder just released a video today that I feel strongly about and I really identify with. And it's a topic that seems to really bother people. How do I know that? Because they complain about it online. And even before there was an online, people complained about this all the way back in first and second edition. And I want to encourage people that it doesn't need to be as big of a concern as a lot of people make it out to be. So what is this important topic? Game balance. Bob the World Builder just did an interview with Griffith Morgan, and the two of them came to this conclusion. The players, not the DM, must balance each combat encounter. So what do they mean by that? It's up to the players to determine how many resources they are going to invest in each encounter. First of all, are they even going to engage in the encounter? Can they just sneak by or talk their way out of it? In fact, talking their way out of it is actually a way to engage with the encounter. Are they going to fight? If they do fight, how many resources are they going to spend? How many spell slots, how many once-a-day abilities are they going to give to this encounter? That's largely up to them. And it's not up to the DM to have it all figured out ahead of time. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how smart you are or how experienced you are as a DM, the players outnumber you. It's math. Simple math. There's 4 or 5 of them, and there's only 1 of you. It's okay to rely on the player's ingenuity and the fact that there are more of them than there are of you. They will figure it out. Now, I don't know that I'm that smart, but I am very experienced. I've been playing this game for a really long time, and I can tell you from my personal experience that I have far more fun when I back off and don't worry about trying to calculate balanced encounters and just let my players figure things out. Because in all my years of gaming, I have regularly surprised by how player ingenuity can turn an encounter that I think is extremely difficult into something relatively easy. Likewise, encounters that I think are relatively moderate turn out to be difficult because of the nature of the D20 system. And that's something we'll come back to in a minute. The next point Bob makes is that OSR games are more balanced than newer editions of D&D. And he's right, because the math is tighter on the simpler games. And ultimately, that doesn't really solve this issue because all of these games depend on the D20 mechanic. And Bob does a great job of explaining why that's true of OSR games, so I definitely recommend you watch his full video. The main thing I want to add to the conversation is the swinginess of the D20. The reality is, when you're rolling the D20, there's 20 different options. Again, math, right? I say that because I've also played a lot of tabletop strategy games. And I'll tell you, almost all of the competitive games don't rely on a D20. All of Games Workshop's games rely on D6s, and games like Star Wars Legion and Marvel Crisis Protocol rely on specifically designed D8s. What's the reason they do that? There's less variability in those dice, and that makes it easier to predict outcomes, and therefore makes it easier to balance the game. I'll give you 2 more examples to further support that point. One is the game Infinity, which is a great game that does use the D20. However, it's extremely complex and has an extensive number of rules in order to make that D20 system run tightly. The other example is Frostgrave and Stargrave, which essentially run on the same core mechanics. One's fantasy, one's sci-fi. If you mention Frostgrave and Stargrave around competitive gamers, here's what they'll tell you. I know because I've done it. Those games are great for casual play, but they're not great for competitive play because the D20 system is too swingy. It's too unpredictable and too unreliable. So bringing this conversation back to Dungeons & Dragons, no matter how well you calculate your encounters, you can't rely on predictability because the D20 is too variable. So I strongly encourage you not to spend too much time and too much stress on trying to balance these encounters. That energy is better spent elsewhere. So let me wrap up with a few examples. I don't recommend the idea of not tracking hit points at all. That's something that Bob quotes from XP to Level 3's channel. And I did that. I used to do that for several years, actually. And it does work. But I eventually ran into players that were good at math, and they figured out what I was doing. And that was very disappointing to them because it spoiled the verisimilitude of the setting, and it also spoiled the competitiveness of the game itself. Then after I stopped doing it, I realized how much more fun the game was for me. Because as I relied on the unpredictable nature of the game itself, I then didn't know what was coming next, and things surprised me about the game. And that made the game more fun for me as the DM. Because remember, you're a player too. As the DM, you are playing the game. And the more the game surprises you and the less control you have, the more exciting it is for you as the DM. So let me wrap this up with 2 tips. Number 1, just make every challenge difficult. I know the Dungeon Master Guide says to try to make some moderate encounters and some easy encounters, and then a couple of hard encounters. That's a fool's errand, because as we established in this video, the system is too swingy and too unpredictable, and it's a lot of work to try to figure that out. Don't try to figure it out. Just make every challenge difficult and let your players figure it out. Let your players decide which encounters they're going to negotiate, which encounters they're going to skip by trying to stealth around, and which encounters they're going to take head on. It's up to them. My second and last tip is to use Mike Shea's lazy encounter benchmark because it works. And if you need something to help you calculate encounters, this is the simplest and most direct way to do it that I know of. So I highly recommend it. And it basically just establishes a ceiling so you don't make your encounters too difficult. So here's how that works. You calculate CR for your encounter by adding up the total player character levels. So if you have 5 third level player characters, that totals 15, 3 times 5. Apparently that's the theme of today's video, math. I keep saying that word a lot. But anyway, here's what you do. You take that total of 15 and then you divide it by 3. So with 3 5th level player characters, that's a total of 15. Divide that by 3, you get 5. And 5 is now your benchmark. You can go up to a challenge rating of 5, but don't go over your benchmark. The only other thing about the formula is you have to adjust it once the player characters get above level 4, because they get a lot of cool abilities at level 5 that make them more powerful. So from level 5 on, you take the total character level and divide it by 2 instead of by 3. So if you have 5 6th level player characters, that's a total of 30. 5 times 6 equals 30. You divide that by 2. Now your lazy encounter benchmark is 15. So you can throw a challenge rating 15 monster at your 5 6th level player characters. So to sum it all up, don't spend too much time and energy trying to control your game. You're better off having fun and enjoying the creativity of your players than you are getting over-invested in encounter building and encounter design, because if you are over-invested, you're more likely to say no when your players come up with creative and fun solutions. So save that energy by not over-preparing your sessions, and then use that saved energy to say yes to your players' creative solutions and interesting ideas. And ultimately, you will have a much more exciting and enjoyable experience as a DM. Well, that's at least been my experience anyway. And that's the whole point of these channels, right? I'm sharing my experience, hoping it'll help make your experience better. So thanks again for watching The Dire Den, and I'll see you next time. Hey, and if you want to hear more of my thoughts on game balance and the OSR, here's 2 videos that I did with Mike from MBR as we discuss these 2 issues.